Thank you, Alex. And welcome everyone to Learning and Mending Understories. I'm Jen, and we're going to start off this evening with the embroidery of the week as we all settle into our Zoom squares. And I want to share with you tonight this native bumblebee that was created by Patricia Watts. And one of the reasons I selected it, besides it being so lovely, was I was thinking about how a lot of kits that we sent out this series, we sent out this thread that is like the metallic thread. And so for those of you that are new to learning and mending and this process, if you've never worked with this thread before, it can be kind of tricky. So I just wanted to give like a 2-second like tidbit on that. It'll fray. And so what we found that works is if you take clear nail polish and paint the end of it and then use it, and then when it reaches the end, just cut that part off, it'll be less of a headache when you're trying to work with it, because it's really, like I said, it's beautiful and produces these great results, but it can drive you a little crazy when you're using it. So this, again, is Patricia Watts, our embroidery of the week. And then what we're going to do is move into right now our popcorn introductions, which we've done in other series. So we'll introduce ourselves with our name, our pronouns, where we're zooming in from, and what we're working on tonight. So I will start. I'm Jen. I use she, her pronouns. I am zooming in from Studio City. And tonight I am working on this pattern that we sent out for this series that is called Metaphysical Blueprint Number 1 by Vanetta Rendler. Sorry. And I will now pass it to Dee.
Hi, Derainer Holland calling in from Baldwin Hills, California. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am currently working on this still beautiful corn piece. And I am going to finish this before this series is over. And I'm happy to be here tonight. And I will pass it on to Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Highland Park. I just found my yellow-rumped warbler and manzanita. Ooh, oh, you can't see it. So it clearly needs a lot of love. So I'm very behind, but getting on with it. Anyhow, excited to be here. And let's see. Let's see, Kristen, maybe. Oh, there you go.
Hello, me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay. Hi. My name is Kristen. I am currently in New York City, but I'm usually in Pennsylvania. I'm not actually sewing. I'm here as a fiction writer and loving it. All right. I will pass it on to Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm here at the Metabolic Studio, and I'm here to play some of this clay that was made here at this site here along the LA River, and I'm here just to listen and hear you all, and I will pass it on to Emily.
Hello. Thanks, Alex. I decided to turn the water off for a moment. Emily here, Echo Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. She, her pronouns, here with the interspecies connection, my dogs, Bucky and Lulu, esteemed members of the household. I'm happy to be here with you all. Tonight I am doing some chores of the house while I listen. And my friend is going to come over and dye my hair also. So it's going to be an exciting couple of hours here. And just really happy to be with you. So let me go ahead and pass it on. May I pass it to Fiorella? Cool.
Buenas noches, everyone. My name is Fiorella. I'm coming to y'all from occupied Ohlone land, also known as San Francisco, California. This will be my first class. Shout out to Juan, who totally told me about this course. And it sounded like such a beautiful experience. So I'm really happy to be here with y'all. I don't have the kit just yet, but I'm super, super excited to get it in the mail. And I can popcorn it. Sorry, there's something going on with my Zoom. I will popcorn her over to Izzy.
Welcome. I'm so excited to have you here tonight. My name is Izzy. My pronouns are they, she. And I'm feeling a little slightly under the weather tonight, so I'm gonna just take everything in. Not working on anything specifically, but excited to be here. And I will pass it on to Michelle.
Hey, good evening. This is Michelle calling from El Sereno, and pronoun he, they. And I'm finding out so many things I didn't know about in this cycle. I'm very excited for all the editions of that. Thank you. And I will ask Yeva.
Hi, I'm Yeva. I'm calling in from Glendale. Go by she, her pronouns. And I'm working on the new pattern. Got some of the wings going. Excited to listen tonight and keep working on this. And I will pass it to Doug.
Thank you, Eva. My name's Douglas Lee. I'm calling in from Metabolic Studio. He is great. And yeah, I'm just, here to listen, hanging out, enjoying the words. I'll probably be tweaking with some electronics. I'll be because you're actively listening. And that's it. I'll pass it on to Millie.
Great evening, everyone. My name is Millie. I am zooming in from Glassell Park. I use she, ella, and we as my pronouns, and I'm currently using some scrap cloth I found because I'm mending my abuelita's grocery bag that she gifted me many, many years ago. That's what I'm doing tonight. And I'm going to pass it on to Lauren.
Hi, Millie. Lauren, I go by she, they pronouns, calling from Tongva Gabrielino land on what would have been the pre-colonial floodplain. Happy to be with you tonight, and I would like to pass it on to the amazing artist who's done all of our flyer art this series, Veneta.
Hi, everyone. So excited to have my art be involved with this amazing series. So I'm super excited, but I'm calling in from the Arts District, Los Angeles, and tonight I'm going to be working on the needlepoint. I will pass it on to James. Thank you, Kanya.
Hello, everybody. My name's James. I go by he, they pronouns, calling in from Gabrielino, Tongva, Quiche territory. I also will just be listening to the readings tonight, but I'm very excited. And I will pass it to Aaron.
Hello, my name is Aaron, go by he, him, calling from Metabolic Studio in Los Angeles. Tonight, I will just be paying very close attention and reading along. I'm really fascinated with everything I've heard so far, and I'm excited to hear the next. I will pass it on to Ursula.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ursula calling in from Seattle. And I have made a very feeble attempt to begin one of the beautiful blue needlepoint pieces, but have yet to make much progress. I will try to maybe do a little bit tonight, but I get distracted between the listening and the stitching. So I will pass on to Kate Lane, please.
Hi, Ursula.
Hey.
I'm Kate Lane, and I am zooming in from Pasadena, and I'm using she, her pronouns. And tonight I am working on starting the brand new embroidery design. And we'll be doing that while I listen to these great readings. Let's see, who has not
Actually,
gone?
I will take it from here. Thank you,
All right.
Kate. Welcome, everyone, to our 10th series of Learning and Mending Understories. In this series, we'll be exploring ecologies of storytelling through speculative fiction. An understory is an underlying layer of vegetation beneath a forest canopy. In this series, we'll be thinking about the complex, vital stories that lie below and the subplots that nurture life in the shadows. Speculative fiction is a broad term that encompasses several different genres, from hard science fiction and fantasy to myth-making and folklore. The underlying characteristic of speculative fiction is that it speculates, it asks, what if? Speculative fiction plays with what is and imagines what could be. Understories does not ponder possibilities that lie in some distant future, but imagines new ways of being present. We will investigate what speculative fiction is, how it disrupts time, and challenges anthropocentric visions of life and the transformative potential it offers. In this series, our embroidery collection features a new design, which we share tonight, by Vanetta Rendler. If you like one of these or one of our other patterns, please send us your mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org, and we'll put that address in the chat bar. Tonight, we will share our screen displaying this week's reading. Feel free to jump in and read aloud from the text as you feel inspired, as we welcome everyone to listen and give voice to the text we share each week. And now I'll pass it over to Izzy, and she can begin tonight.
Thank you, Jen. So for those of you who weren't here, last week we read The Author of the Acacia Seeds by Ursula K. Le Guin. And it was essentially, just to give a brief overview, a satirical account from a fictitious journal of theolinguistics, a field that studies non-human languages. And these scientists in the field of theolinguistics are attempting to decode messages left by ants and acacia seeds, as well as the language of dolphins and penguins. And in addition to this text, we read the essay Sowing Worlds, a Seed Bag for Terraforming with Earth Others by Donna J. Haraway. And this piece laid out the ecological relationships between ants and acacia seeds, as well as interspecies and just acacia trees in general, as well as other interspecies relationships within the carrier bag theory of fiction. And the carrier bag theory of fiction we reviewed in the first week of the series, which is essentially a theory of fiction laid out by Ursula Le Guin that is built off of Elizabeth Fisher's carrier bag theory of evolution that was presented in the 70s, that articulates that the first human tool was not a weapon or a spear or like a phallic kind of deadly thing, but rather a bag to carry things like seed or food or water or your baby in, which I enjoyed Alex's musical component, and because it was beautiful, but also the oyas as vessels of that hold water, I thought was also very in alignment with what we've been thinking about as kind of a mode of storytelling as well. So this week we would be continuing with Donna Haraway, reading an excerpt from her essay, A Cyborg Manifesto. We will not be, the whole thing is quite long. We will not be reading the whole thing. I can put it in the chat, but it was published in 1985. And in this essay, she presents the cyborg as a figure that challenges rigid boundaries between human and animal and machine, and a Western construction around humanness and identity. And there are three binaries, just because we're not going to be reading the whole thing, just to give kind of a grounding. There are three binaries central to her theory of cyborgism: the binary between human and animal, human and machine, so organic and kind of non-organic, and physical and non-physical. And through her myth of the cyborg, she blurs the delineations between these binaries, challenging a politics that's based solely on identity, particularly identity that's constructed through Westernism, imperialism, colonialism. And the cyborg, this is a quote, "The cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world," she argues, "with no origin story in the Western sense." So without the fall of innocence to explain its origins, the Garden of Adam and Eve, the cyborg does not and cannot conform to myths about a kind of original unity, in her words, or an identification with nature in the Western sense. So there's a freedom that comes with being a creature that has no origin story and without identity, and speculative fiction kind of allows us to explore what this freedom can look like. And in addition to this text, we will be reading Two Ecological Fancies, which is a playful speculative fiction short story that's broken down into two parts. The first part, The Miraculous Birth, presents a world in which people begin birthing plants and animals, eventually rendering humans obsolete. And the second part, The General Strike, tells a tale about carrots that go on strike and refuse to germinate. So in both of the texts we're reading today, we'll be thinking about embodiment and its relationship to productivity. Capitalism so often mediates our relationship to our body via labor. So what these texts do is they challenge the body, whether human, animal, or machine, as a productive mechanism. And one way in which they do that is by literally just blurring the boundaries between all these things. And additionally, these texts help us think about what may happen to a constructed world or a built environment when productivity ceases to be. So, and they're just kind of fun, playful texts too. So yeah, I'm excited to read them with you guys. Thank you for bearing with me with my description. And without further ado, I'll pass it to Matt for the screen share.
Donna J. Haraway, A Cyborg Manifesto, 1991. An ironic dream of a common language for women in the integrated circuit. This text is an effort to build an ironic political myth faithful to feminism, socialism, and materialism. Perhaps more faithful as blasphemy is faithful than as reverent worship and identification. Blasphemy has always seemed to require taking things very seriously. I know no better stance to adopt from within the secular, religious, evangelical traditions of United States politics, including the politics of socialist feminism. Blasphemy protects one from the moral majority within, while still insisting on the need for community. Blasphemy is not apostasy. Irony is about contradictions that do not resolve into larger wholes, even dialectically, about the tension of holding incompatible things together because both or all are necessary and true. Irony is about humor and serious play. It is also a rhetorical strategy and a political method, one I would like to see more honored within socialist feminism. At the center of my ironic faith, my blasphemy, is the image of a cyborg.
A cyborg is a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and organism, a creature of social reality as well as a creature of fiction. Social reality is lived, social relations, our most important political construction, a world-changing fiction. The international women's movements have constructed women's experience as well as uncovered or discovered this crucial collective object. This experience is a fiction and fact of the most crucial political kind. Liberation rests on the construction of the consciousness, the imaginative apprehension of oppression, and so of possibility. The cyborg is a matter of fiction and lived experience that changes what counts as women's experience in the late 20th century. This is a struggle over life and death, but the boundary between science fiction and social reality is an optical illusion. Contemporary science fiction is full of cyborgs, creatures simultaneously animal and machine, who populate worlds ambiguously natural and crafted. Modern medicine is also full of cyborgs, of couplings between organism and machine, each conceived as coded devices in an intimacy and with a power that has not generated in the history of sexuality. Cyborg sex restores some of the lovely replicative baroque of ferns and invertebrates, such nice organic prophylactics against heterosexism. Cyborg replication is uncoupled from organic reproduction. Modern production seems like a dream of cyborg colonization work, a dream that makes the nightmare of Taylorism seem idyllic. And modern war is a cyborg orgy, coded by C-31, Command, Control, Communication, Intelligence, an $84 billion item in 1984's US defense budget. I am making an argument for the cyborg as a fiction mapping our social and bodily reality, and as an imaginative resource suggesting some very fruitful couplings. Michael Foucault's biopolitics is a flaccid premonition of cyborg politics, a very open field.
By the late 20th century, our time, a mythic time, we are all chimeras, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are cyborgs. The cyborg is our ontology. It gives us our politics. The cyborg is a condensed image of both imagination and material reality, the two joined centers structuring any possibility of historical transformation. In the traditions of Western science and politics, the tradition of racist, male-dominant capitalism, the tradition of progress, the tradition of the appropriation of nature as resource for the production of culture, the tradition of reproduction of the self from the reflections of the other, the relations between organism and machine has been a border war. The stakes of the border war have been the territories of production, reproduction, and imagination. This chapter is an argument for pleasure in the confusion of boundaries and for the responsibility in their construction. It is also an effort to contribute to socialist feminist culture and theory in a postmodernist, non-naturalist mode, and in the utopian tradition of imagining a world without gender, which is perhaps a world without genesis, but maybe also a world without end. The cyborg incarnation is outside salvation history, nor does it mark time in an Oedipal calendar, attempting to heal the terrible cleavages of gender in an oral symbiotic utopia or post-Oedipal apocalypse. As Zoe Sophoulis argues in her unpublished manuscript on Jacques Lacan, Melanie Klein, and nuclear culture, Lacan, the most terrible and perhaps the most promising monsters in cyborg worlds are embodied in non-Oedipal narratives with a different logic of repression, which we need to understand for our survival.
The cyborg is a creature in a post-gender world. It has no truck with bisexuality, pre-Oedipal symbiosis, unalienated labor, or other seductions to organic wholeness through a final appropriation of all powers of the parts into a higher unity. In a sense, the cyborg has no origin story in the Western sense. A final irony, since the cyborg is also the awful apocalyptic telos of the West's escalating dominations of abstract individuation, an ultimate self untied at last from all dependency, a man in space. An origin story in the Western humanist sense depends on the myth of original unity, fullness, bliss, and terror, represented by the phallic mother from whom all humans must separate. The task of individual development and of history, the twin potent myths inscribed most powerfully for us in psychoanalysis and Marxism. Hilary Klein has argued that both Marxism and psychoanalysis, in their concepts of labor and individuation and gender formation, depend on the plot of original unity, out of which difference must be produced and enlisted in a drama of escalating domination of women in nature. The cyborg skips the step of original unity, of identification with nature in the Western sense. This is its illegitimate promise that might lead to subversion of its teleology as Star Wars. Theology as Star Wars. The cyborg is resolutely committed to partiality, irony, intimacy, and perversity. It is oppositional, utopian, and completely without innocence. No longer structured by the polarity of public and private, the cyborg defines a technological polis based partly on a revolution of social relations in the oikos, the household. Nature and culture are reworked. The one can no longer be the resource for appropriation or incorporation by the other. The relationships for forming wholes from parts, including those of polarity and hierarchical domination, are at issue in the cyborg world. Unlike the hopes of Frankenstein's monster, the cyborg does not expect its father to save it through a restoration of the garden. That is, though, the fabrication of a heterosexual mate, through its completion in a finished whole, a city and cosmos. The cyborg does not dream of community on the model of the organic family, this time without the Oedipal project. The cyborg would not recognize the Garden of Eden. It is not made of mud and cannot dream of returning to dust. Perhaps that is why I want to see if cyborgs can subvert the apocalypse of returning to nuclear dust in the manic compulsion to name the enemy. Cyborgs are not reverent. They do not remember the cosmos. They are wary of holism, but needy for connection. They seem to have a natural feel for united front politics, but without the vanguard party. The main trouble with cyborgs, of course, is that they are the illegitimate offspring of militarism and patriarchal capitalism, not to mention state socialism. But illegitimate offspring are often exceedingly unfaithful to their origins. Their fathers, after all, are inessential.
Sorry, so we'll be beginning at there here. It's just the same text, just a different version and further on in the text.
Sorry, did I skip in the middle of the sentence?
No,
Oh,
you didn't do anything wrong. It's just two different PDFs of the same text. We're starting from there on this one. Further down, I can begin. There are several consequences to taking seriously the imagery of cyborgs as other than our enemies. Our bodies, ourselves. Bodies are maps of power and identity. Cyborgs are no exception. The cyborg body is not innocent. It was not born in a garden. It does not seek unitary identity, and so generate antagonistic dualisms without end or until the world ends. It takes irony for granted. One is too few, and two is only one possibility. Intense pleasure and skill, machine skill, ceases to be a sin, but an aspect of embodiment. The machine is not an it to be animated, worshipped, and dominated. The machine is us, our processes, an aspect of our embodiment. We can be responsible for machines. They do not dominate or threaten us. We are responsible for boundaries. We are they. Up till now, once upon a time, female embodiment seemed to be given, organic, necessary, and female embodiment seemed to mean skill in mothering and its metaphoric extensions. Only by being out of place could we take intense pleasure in machines, and then with excuses that this was organic activity after all, appropriate to females. Cyborgs might consider more seriously the partial, fluid, sometimes aspect of sex and sexual embodiment. Gender might not be global identity after all, even if it has profound historical breadth and depth. The ideologically charged question of what counts as daily activity, as experience, can be approached by exploiting the cyborg image. Feminists have recently claimed that women are given to dailiness, that women more than men somehow sustain daily life and so have a privileged epistemological position potentially. There is a compelling aspect to this claim, one that makes visible unvalued female activity and names it as the ground of life. But the ground of life? What about all the ignorance of women, all the exclusions and failures of knowledge and skill? What about men's daily access to daily competence, to knowing how to build things, to take them apart, to play? What about other embodiments? Cyborg gender is a local possibility taking a global vengeance. Race, gender, and capital require a cyborg theory of wholes and parts. There is no drive in cyborgs to produce total theory, but there is an intimate experience of boundaries, their construction and deconstruction. There is a myth system waiting to become a political language to ground one way of looking at science and technology and challenging the informatics of domination in order to act potently.
A cyborg manifesto. One last image. Organisms and organismic. Holistic politics depend on metaphors of rebirth and invariably call on the resources of reproductive sex. I would suggest that cyborgs have more to do with regeneration and are suspicious of the reproductive matrix and of most birthing. For salamanders, regeneration after injury, such as the loss of a limb, involves regrowth of structure and restoration of function with the constant possibility of twinning or other odd topographical productions at the site of former injury. The regrown limb can be
The regrown limb can be monstrous, duplicated, potent. We have all been injured profoundly. We require regeneration, not rebirth. And the possibility for our reconstitution includes the utopian dream of a hope for a monstrous world without gender. Cyborg imagery can help express two crucial arguments in this essay. First, the production of universal totalizing theory is a major mistake, but misses most of reality, probably always, but certainly now. And second, taking responsibility for the social relations of science and technology means refusing an anti-science metaphysics, a demonology of technology, and so means embracing the skillful task of reconstructing the boundaries of daily life, in partial connection with others, in communication with all of our parts. It is not just that science and technology are possible means of great human satisfaction, as well as a matrix of complex dominations. Cyborg imagery can suggest a way out of the maze of dualism in which we have explained our bodies and our tools to ourselves. This is a dream, not of a common language, but of a powerful infidel heteroglossia. It is an imagination of a feminist speaking in tongues to strike fear into the circuits of the super savers of a new right. It means both building and destroying machines, identities, categories, relationships, space, stories. Though both are bound in the spiral dance, I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess.
Two Ecological Fantasies by David Watson. The Miraculous Birth. Only later did some say that the first of what were to be many miraculous births was presaged in signs. Only much later did a long list of the omens appear. Some could not resist applying the veneer of the old myths to the circumstances that had seemed entirely novel. Someone had reported a two-headed comet, but that was predictable. It had been done before. Different indeed, and widely reported, was the experience of being awakened from troubled sleep to the sound of a woman laughing, saying, "Oh, my children, my beautiful children." The first birth made local, then national and international news. A young woman claiming to be a virgin, a claim no one believed, of course, gave birth to a California condor chick. Various government agencies stepped in, and the chick was placed with foster parents in a condor nest. It proved a perfect condor, right down to the DNA. Fundamentalist Christians protested, demanding that such a freakish manifestations be aborted before it was too late. But most people thought it a creation of the tabloids, or a government conspiracy to use the population in genetic engineering experiments. Some blamed radical environmental terrorists. The young woman did tell of a series of dreams in which an old woman, perhaps an Indian, had visited her and told her to prepare to receive the blessing. She admitted remembering having sex at one time or another beforehand, but could not recall any details except to insist that the father was most definitely not a condor.
Soon followed a flood of such births, of rare and not so rare animals, even of creatures known to be extinct. Repeats came in from remote precincts, miraculous, some thought monstrous. Birds of nearly extinct lemurs, humpback whales, quetzals, rhinos, woodland bison, passenger pigeons, dodos, even a snow leopard born in Tibet at the exact place and time when the next Dalai Lama was to reappear according to certain adepts. But that was not all. While women birded animals, men began birding plants, usually after a nervous attack while walking outside, where the plants would take root. A man would suddenly fall ill, trembling in spasms of pain, expel the plant, fall into exhausted sleep, then awake in the shade of a redwood or mahogany, a sandalwood or teak tree that had emerged as a seedling. A sneeze might also discharge several rare insects.
By then, few human births were occurring, and those were considered highly unusual. Scientists speculated that these children were in fact Neanderthals, not modern humans, while others argued that they were a type not previously encountered. Such speculation lasted less than a generation before science itself began to die out along with religion. None of the old responses made any sense, and people were beginning to take the changes for granted, practicing a metaphysical discipline based on laughter and dancing. The new human babies seemed to speak a common, completely unintelligible language among themselves, and even appeared to communicate without speech at all, and with plants and animals. Even the air was changing, becoming sweet and thick, heady and narcotic. Those who lived through the change found themselves frequently giddy, sexually aroused, overcome by an invasive sense of awe at simple things like doing the dishes or sitting under a tree. They stopped going to work. Armies, governments, corporations dissolved. When a few holdouts tried to set off a nuclear conflagration to stop the inevitable, nothing happened. Even minerals were changing, and by now, uranium had turned into a kind of obsidian, like the slag that comes out of blast furnaces. People collected it for its strange shapes and luster. Earthquakes finally toppled most of the landmarks that made the world recognizable to the late 20th century. The last pre-transformation generation would gape in wonder at the pterodactyls roosting on the roof of what was once the White House. Not long after, that last generation was gone, and none of the words were the same for anything.
The general strike. It started when the carrots refused to germinate. They'd had enough. If they had had tools, say drills and hammers, they would have laid them down. One might imagine their abandoned chisels and mallets left on the elaborate scaffolding around the precariously tall, swaying, irregular, Arger-like cathedral of what was to become a mature carrot. The fine lattice work of the leafy pinnacle unfinished and flapping like the torn ridging on a scuttled sailing ship, the incomplete wiring around the foundations in the dusty soil. One might imagine the tiny orange rivets growing along a narrow, shallow furrow made by a gardener's fingers, each displaying a minuscule feathery green handkerchief to wave at the watering can as it made its rounds, each fine linen spray containing its maintenance instructions for the growing vessel. But the seeds left there curled up and petrified like dead fleas buried in a tiny trench, not because the rain had washed them away, or because they were too dry or too soggy, too shallow or too deep. The conditions were appropriate. Of this, the gardener could be sure.
One might also imagine the carrot proletarians leaning back, if they could lean back, and folding their wise, gnarled hands into sinewy arms, if they had hands and arms, declaring no more. But of course, carrots make themselves without tools and scaffolding in a kind of Mobian caprice, making themselves out of what appears to be nothing, like rabbits pulling themselves out of a hat without the hat. They work quite mysteriously, undercover, a secret guild. Now you don't see them, now you do. A seed grows a hair like a pollywog's tail, or the tail of a comet or galaxy. After a while, the gardener will tear it from the ground and deliver it to the chopping block, if the deer haven't gotten to it first.
Not this time, though. They never opened their shutters, never came out of their shadowy hovels. No carrots the first year. It'd be almost possible to imagine them behind closed doors, drinking their homemade grog, kicking off the wooden clogs for which sabotage has been named, and dancing to a carroty music of their own making. The mute refusal of the carrots, no leaflets, no broadcasts, no communiques, no congresses, sent shockwaves through the garden. Quite soon after, the other rows joined the mutiny. First the beans, after growing opulent in their foliage, and after producing flowers insouciantly and dazzlingly seductive, bore no fruit. It was a wanton gesture bordering on vindictiveness. The manic blossoms made the bees swoon. The bees might have been as hallucinogenic as peyote if they had come on, but they didn't. But that was the year, or so the gardener was told, that the cactuses too produced no buttons. The following year, the beans didn't germinate at all. Like the carrots, they simply boycotted the event. The row lay there, indifferent to sun and rain, like slightly raised scar tissue. One could imagine getting down on all fours and placing an ear against the ground to hear what might be going on there behind the locked door of the bean's renunciation. but there would only be a capacious silence, as if the beings turned inward after the year of sterile profligacy were meditating on cushions. They were not going to answer that door. They too might themselves be listening at another locked door.
It was only a matter of time before the corn and the squash and the chillax, lonely without the beans, all followed suit. They too put on a startling display one year before giving up the ghost the next. One had to suspect that one had to suspect what was coming as one gazed on a row of beautiful, deep green corn, tall and lusty and almost blue as a tropical sea, tasseling vivaciously, and then bearing no issue. The gardener must have gazed across the corn with the despair of a thirsty wanderer who realizes that the desert oasis is nothing but a mirage. Finally, all the crops joined the strike. Replacement seeds, new and supposedly improved strains from distant laboratories were tucked in as a situation one might first discover an irritant become a question of consternation, growing unease, a sense of peril, and outright cataclysm. But the seeds fared poorly. Some germinated only to be mowed down by obscure plagues. One hardy little tomato plant would catch a blister or blight, start to sniffle, and overnight all would be stuck down with a biblical violence. The engineered seeds were too perfect, too uniform, too docile. One might imagine them smiling identically in the conditioned optimism, all of them properly inoculated, all unblemished, all sportingly the same smarting, creased, and starched jumpsuits, all shouldering the tools, all blissfully daydreaming to the same piped-in music. But then would come a ripple in the smooth surface of things, and brutish muscular insects would arrive, scared and hirsute, or sly viruses would infiltrate the crowd like pickpockets, and the manufactured seeds and plants would grow even more pale than they were made, wither and crumple all at once.
Gradually, it became clear that whatever it was the carrots had initiated was now more than a limited refusal. Rather, an entirely new regime had emerged, and qualitatively different conditions were now in place, leaving the tools hanging in their storage shed. Hoses coiled and the granary empty, the gardener moved on, actually becoming the tattered, hungry beggar that had been a flickering apparition in a dream that season when the carrots began obscurely and tentatively to turn everything upside down. Emblem of that shadowy vagrant disappearing on the horizon, only the scarecrow remained, in its weathered frock flapping exhausted in the gentle wind, a twisted, wiry arm pointing away at nothing.
Thank you, everyone, for reading. So before we begin discussion, David Watson. Yeah, David Watson, I see your question, Lauren, in the chat. David Watson wrote this, I believe when was it? It was like 1960 something. I can double check on the date, but he was the editor of Fifth Estate, this anarchist publication, where he wrote for them for a while. There's not much on him. I was trying to do research on him. And I just know that he had a relationship to Fifth Estate and wrote a few pieces for them in like the 60s through the 90s, but hasn't been active in Fifth Estate is still printed, but hasn't been active in Fifth Estate in a while, but I can do more research on that. And these two texts are like obviously very different. One is very theoretically driven. The other one is a little bit more playful. I mean, both are playful, but they occupy a different genre. And I guess why I wanted to bring them together was because both of them kind of challenge this idea of productivity and the body's relationship to reproductivity. And they really question the boundaries between human and animal, and in the case of Cyborg Manifesto, machine, but also organic and inorganic. And so I guess some questions would be like, what are your thoughts on these categories, human, animal, machine, as they exist as separate entities, as well as their points of intersection? And what is the value to you in complicating these categories? And Haraway writes, a cyborg is a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and organism, a creature of social reality as well as a creature of fiction. Social reality is lived social relations, our most important political construction. A world-changing fiction. And she continues, this is a struggle over life and death, but the boundary between science fiction and social reality is an optical illusion. So social relations as that which kind of holds together our society in many ways. It's what how we mediate our relationships through, through capitalism. It's filtered through social relation that's built off of productivity and labor. And so fiction, what draws me to fiction is the potential it has to reshape these social relations. And so I guess the question I would have tonight is like, how do you feel about fiction and its potential to reshape our social relations, as well as our relationship to our embodiment? And I know my questions aren't that clear for tonight, but I guess things that come up for me with these readings is like questions of agency and refusal, like the power of refusal, a kind of playfulness, a reforming of ways of relating, or like a Deleuzian reterritorialization, if that's something that is familiar to you. So yeah, I will put some questions in the chat and open the floor. Also, whatever came up for you, like in the reading at all, feel free to bring to the discussion. Yeah.
I think what I enjoy most about these readings and the freedom they bring is our not knowing, that these are based on creative storytelling, and humans, that's our very first tool, is language and story. And by changing language and changing the way we receive language, in this case, we are, in order to engage, we need to be open, and being open to hearing something that doesn't fit what we know creates a wonderful space to be in. Or for me, it's a wonderful space. I really enjoy it. Each of the readings has me thinking about them long after the Zoom is over. So thank you for those choices.
I really, I'm trying to kind of hybridize two comments. One came, I was Instagramming live the Haraway reading on the Cyborg Manifesto, and somebody said that what we were reading reminded them of Chat GBT, like AI kind of generated stuff as a cyborg. And then I was thinking about the poetics of language and the kind of difficulty of that working on AI, like in particular, the description of corn as tall and lusty and almost blue as a tropical sea. Like that is so unbelievable that somebody could like pull that concept together to describe native corn, and that having spent a long time admiring the infiniteness of the color and shapes of native corn, the idea of kind of coming back to the carpetbagger, not the, is it the carpet bag? The carrier bag theory of fiction as containing everything in the known universe. Like a phrase like that makes me feel like there's almost epigenetic knowledge that we have about corn that allows a writer to make a phrase like that and have me understand it.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about all these readings in the context of the carrier bag theory of fiction. It's kind of hard not to. And in that spirit, I started reading the second piece, the ecological fancies, and the author starts out talking about condors. I think is the first kind of like immaculate birth that happens, or miraculous birth they call it. So in the spirit of thinking about the cyborg manifesto and the cyborg as kind of its own theory of fiction, I think is like slightly what Donna Haraway is doing in my understanding. That, you know, beginning to read this ecological fancies piece, even though I knew what was coming was going to be sort of absurdist fiction, the first thing I thought of was I had to look up this word, something called parthenogenesis. But in reality, California condors very recently have undergone this process of like this parthenogenesis, this like virgin birth, this immaculate birth, which sounds like stranger than fiction, but is all at once true. So that just kind of worked really well with the cyborg manifesto to me, in that it's both sort of fictional and could be taken fictionally, but it's also real. So kind of these two things living together.
What came up for me in terms of thinking about like the agency of more than human kin was this idea sort of like from Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing of I'd prefer not to, like saying I'd prefer not to as a way of resisting the like domineering forces of capitalism. And also thinking about like other writers in that space, like Trisha Hersey's Rest is Resistance. And I think in the week one reading, we had the phrase like harmonizing with exhaustion. So I guess what comes up for me in terms of like thinking about species striking and not reproducing is also like as a response to like monoculture and plantation no scene dynamics, that choice to say I'd prefer not to, or harmonizing with exhaustion, resting, and like maybe that's a whole thing with like multi-species agency too, thinking about like fungal diseases and how they're very active in sort of preventing monoculture crops from continuing into infinity. Yeah, that's all I have for now.
Yeah, and in that vein, there was a story that I almost put in the syllabus but didn't, and it's called it's in the book On the Origin of Species and Other Stories by Bo Young Kim. And the short story I'll put in the thread or in the chat, but It was the one Stars Shine in Earth's Sky, it's a letter written by, it's written to somebody's sibling, and they're talking to their sibling about how like they grew up with this affliction, this disease, this illness that no one could figure out what it was. And then towards the end, you kind of piece together that it was just sleep, like going to sleep was this mysterious disease, and that everyone was very concerned about them, like with this desire to sleep. And if I didn't feel so sick, I would have more intelligent things to say about it. I'm just going to put it in the thread because it's on this vein of like exhaustion, and it's really fun and it's a good read. Yeah, I'll drop it in there.
I'm trying to put a thought together that is sort of rounding up some of your part of your question, Izzy, about complicating the points of intersection. Fiction is a chance to reshape social relations with it, sort of a generalization of these works have been written in the past, some in the near past, some further in the past. And in general, we tend to find that a lot of what would seem to be very fantastical comes to pass. So I think we see that's why it's important to pay attention to maybe what are later works of fiction or future works of fiction of what seem to be strange intersections, much of which is written about in fiction, speculative fiction, somehow comes to pass one way or another. So, it's a very generalization, quite a generalization I'm making, but I think that's why it's important to pay attention to the intersections in fiction that seem odd, but because rather than dismissing them as, oh, that's really odd, realize that that too may come to pass. So.
At the end of the Cyborg Manifesto, she says, I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess. And I have no formed thoughts about this, but I was wondering if anyone has any thoughts about this sentence.
When I first read it, I pictured like a weird pop star, like hyper pop, the pop genre that's emerging, being like, I'd rather be a cyborg than a goddess or something like that. Like it just was like ringing in my ear over and over again in this really creepy, like, have you guys seen the trailer for this new movie Megan, which is about this serial killer cyborg girl that somebody created to help their little sibling who was being bullied in school? And then it's kind of a campy, it looks like a kind of a campy movie, but I pictured that robot singing that over and over again. Not that intelligent of a comment again, but just something like haunting.
I don't think it's possible for you to make a not intelligent comment, Izzy, but you can keep trying.
I can, trust me.
I think the the thought exercise of both these pieces was really fun. Just like this organic object that we don't often think of as sentient, like a carrot deciding to go on strike. And I the first piece made me think of a video that was recently released by Boston Dynamics. Some of you maybe have seen it, but it's of this it's of a humanoid cyborg that they've been developing for some time now that is doing an obstacle course and helping a construction worker get tools. And it can walk on two legs, and it has this pack on it, and it's this very awkward moving thing. And because all of its joints are like working in isolation with each other, and it becomes very clear that the reason why humans don't look so like jittery and weird as like a robot is because we're like every part of us is working fluidly, continuously, cyclically with each other at all times. Whereas with a robot, everything is in some ways like isolated and separated. So these very jolty movements are like very uncanny and eerie. But in this video, you also see this robot performing tasks that we would usually pawn off on someone that we to build some large structure, for example. And like in the future, let's say they succeed in building a lot of these and they deploy them to various situations, they say they want to use it exclusively for like they have no intentions of using it for war. But they don't say anything about if they sell it to someone, whether whatever they do with it is something they take responsibility for. And I think some governments have purchased some of their dogs because they have those little dog-like robots too, and they can mount any weapon, whatever they want on it. But I do like to think that if an AI truly was smarter than the average human, could an AI have the self-awareness in a cyborg to realize, oh, wait a second, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't have an interest. Could a cyborg go on strike? And like, would there be any way in which if an AI got smarter than its coders, it could just code itself out of wanting to actually do the work that we've tried to build all of this crazy infrastructure for it to do? Is robots is robots the one with Robin Williams?
I
Is like
think so. Yeah, I recently rewatched it and it's supposed to be a kids movie, but it's about these robots that are trying to be rendered obsolete by this like new tech company and they basically it's a very good proletariat film, I must say. I highly recommend it if you want to if you're hanging out with a you want an excuse to watch it, you can hang out with a kid and watch it, but it's really good and it thinks about like cyborgism in a fun way.
Just something I thought of when there's I think Lauren made a comment about cyborg reproduction. And this is kind of human forced cyborg reproduction, but at this point, I feel like people have seen these AI generated images where you type in a prompt and it generates an image based off like words you tell it to. I saw people kind of mixing and matching with Chat GPT where they ask that to come up with a prompt and then they plug that prompt into these AI generating images. So it's basically an AI telling another AI what like image to create. And I think it was just done with like living rooms, like future, like certain living rooms, but the images that were produced were very interesting just to kind of see this cyborg reproduction of like intermingling between cyborgs and AI creating these images.
We have time for one or two more comments before we move on to Alex's soundscapes again.
I just want to pick up on Alexandra's sort of comment about I'd rather be a cyborg than a goddess. Because I think it's very funny, which is also a surprising way to end such a heady, like super like linguistically challenging essay with humor, which I think is also kind of playful. And I think that humor is one of those things that I wonder if a cyborg could do. But one of the things and the inconsistencies and the ironies that she's playing with is like the idea that a cyborg doesn't come from the mud and doesn't return to dust. And neither does a goddess. So I wonder if it's a false dichotomy that actually the cyborg and the goddess are more similar than they are different. They're both kind of idealized forms that reflect cultural moments. So it seems to me that in many ways, the cyborg and the goddess mirror each other. And
it reminds me of a avant-garde sort of.
I wonder if it's, well, this is what came up for me, was that I wonder if it's because the goddess, in like a way, goddesses don't really have control over their mythologies because so many different cultures will interpret the goddess like in so many different ways. And so it can sort of expand and shape in like multiple forms. And maybe it's like not so much about agency, but there's like so much commentary around it versus like the cyborg. It was saying how it doesn't really have an origin story. And I mean, just to play along with some of the comments that we've been making, like it could probably like outcode itself from an origin story too, and from like any sort of like impositions that we're posing upon it. I don't know. That's just kind of like what came up for me, but
For me, it was interesting because we had to read the parts of the Cyborg Manifesto in school, and I entered the reading with a certain mental model of what a cyborg is, and I felt like my assumptions and all my mental model was being destroyed in the reading by Donna Haraway and her definition of a cyborg. So I guess for me, that's also interesting in how she plays with these two distinct categories, cyborg and goddess, and wanted to say that. Wow.
Thank you, Izzy, for another wonderful and challenging and thought-provoking reading. And thank you, everybody, for the conversation. Just wanted to remind everybody who has been here in the last few weeks or who hasn't, that in order to continue these conversations and extend them, the studio has started a Discord called Water Community Power. And if you go onto that, or if you join, I think thank you, Matt, for posting that in the chat bar. You will see the PDFs for all of our readings under the learning and mending category. Is that what it's under, Matt? Learning and mending? Yeah. And for anybody who would like to join and understand how to use it, if you say so in the chat bar, we'll open a breakout room when Alex serenades us with more lovely percussive sounds. And Matt will slip into the virtual tunnel into a chat room and work with you on the Discord so you get a hang of it. And before we sign off, Izzy, do you want to tell us what's in store for us next week?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you, Lauren, for yeah, thank you. And also, yeah, next week, Speech Sounds by Octavia Butler, written in 1985. It's based in Los Angeles, so close to home. For those of you that are located in Los Angeles, or the metabolic HQ is where this story takes place. And it's post-apocalyptic Los Angeles, where a pandemic has basically torn apart the city and led people speechless. So we'll be thinking about language more. We'll be thinking about infrastructure falling apart. I call next week the voice of collapse, as I think Octavia Butler so wonderfully is. Yeah, I'm excited for that. Hopefully see you all next week.
Alex,
Yay!
that was so awesome.
Yeah, that was
fun.
Oh my God.
That was great.
You blew my mind.
Did you hear the water drops at the end?
Yep.
That's great.
But like the whole thing was just you nailed it. Like
Oh, good.
it was so beautiful, the textures of it and the weird distancing that Zoom gives you, you know,
Okay.
with something handmade and hand played and in the stairwell. And it was like being in a real like performance, like a real sort of like edgy avant-garde performance.
That's
And
fun.
and it's the real deal. I was realizing like you made the instrument you were playing
Yeah.
out of clay you dug out of the ground. That's insane. And can
Yeah,
you,
that was a lot of fun.
I think you designed that for Sonic Division, didn't you? Do you remember what you,
Yeah, yeah. This one I was trying to design it so that water would hit it, and then needed to keep experimenting basically. But
I'm wondering what would happen. You know, that thing that Sal helped me build on the moon that moves water from the storage tanks into that well?
yes,
You think that you could try like positioning that to see if the water falls, whether it would hit that?
yeah, that should work. I think I would also need to glaze one so it could still work how this sounds, but not get soaked and lose sound. Because once it gets wet, it might dampen the resonance.
Oh, right,
But,
right.
but I think that's kind of what I'm after. So I'm hoping that water would play this.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was lots of fun. I'm glad that you could hear the drops because that's like very subtle, and but I'm glad it came off.
Did. Great job.
It was cool.
Was it fun?
For me, yes.
I mean, did you know, like, how did you know when to stop at the end? Were you like, oh, am I going on too long or?
No, you know what? I just was I knew that I wanted to let the water run after playing a while. I was like, okay, well, I don't know what more I could do, but I know I wanted to hear the water, so I was really hoping that if I was quiet, it would come through.
It was great. It's hard to do. It's hard to like perform less like that.
Yeah, definitely the second time was funner than the beginning because you do feel like you're trying to do too much and the space is weird. But it's a great first run.
Well, next week I asked Doreen, our visiting yodeler from Berlin, to be our sound specialist, and she has agreed. So we will have Octavia Butler yodeling going on.
That is amazing.
It's going to be amazing.
So cool. Well, I'm feeling kind of sick, so I'm going to hop off. But thanks everyone for tonight.
Izzy, you did a great job. I actually really thought it was very like relaxed tonight. I was glad we didn't hop into separate rooms. You feel the
Yeah.
same way?
Yeah, and I realized that when I'm not sick, I'm less manic, so my energy is like
Yeah, well, just try and keep a mental note of that next week when you're hopefully feeling well. Just
yes, I will.
so you can just say to yourself, I'm fine when I'm sick. So
Yeah, exactly. I can be chill.
Yeah.
I'm capable of chillness somehow. I don't
you
know.
guys think I don't think we really need to have a Zoom meeting on Friday, do you? I feel like we've kind of got it now.
I feel like we're good for next week. Yeah.
I think we are too.
Okay,
Cool.
I think same. And I also was really thought it was nice to have the popcorn introductions.
It was really nice.
I had missed that kind of way of easing into it. So should we just replicate for next week? We're halfway through the series. I think we kind of have it kind of like dialed in by now.
Yeah, let's do that.
And then let's just meet at 5 again on Tuesday, and I'll bring Doreen in so she can do what Alex did and get adjusted to what we want from her. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That helps.
Great. Good night,
All
everyone.
right. Great work, everyone.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Izzy. That was great.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Feel better.
Bye.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
feel better.
Thank you. Good night.
Night, everyone.
All right.